What did you hear?
Stephen, always a pleasure to talk to you. I should call you when I want to talk to somebody about what's going on in the international sphere. I saw you wrote a little bit about Mark Carney's speech, which I think is one of the most important speeches of the last decade by a world leader. Because I think what we saw in the past couple of days, despite the histrionics and the comical and buffoonery and all of that, I think it's been an inflection point for the West. Because what you saw with Mark Carney's speech, what you saw with the response of the French, the British, other NATO members is the kind of realization that, we're going to have to really go it alone. That
Yeah.
this nation that had been, the longtime leader of the free world, the leader of NATO, is sort of committing existential suicide right in front of us. And we can't, we've tried flattery. We've tried sucking up to him. We've tried, giving military parades and meeting the king. You know,
Yeah.
that's just the price of entry. And then he
Well,
still shuts you down.
the head of FIFA gave him the Peace Prize. I mean, everyone's working an angle to try to get along with this guy
He
as if,
invented the Peace Prize.
right, as if appeasement works with the bully.
Well, and by the way, I don't begrudge them trying. But what we saw, and I think what Mark Carney's speech was, why it was so important, was that Mark Carney basically said the emperor has no clothes. And by the emperor, he didn't not just mean Donald Trump. He meant the kind of the Western alliance,
And
the rule,
the and the
the rules-based
superpowers.
global order. Like he said, don't ever say that anymore
Yeah.
because anybody who abided by it, as we all did, also realized that there were violations of it, that superpowers and hegemons didn't always abide by the rules that they had set up and enforced. And let's not kid ourselves. Trump is an extreme version of that, but he's not a completely anomalous version, is what Mark was saying.
Yeah.
And we have to realize that we have to stand up for ourselves. I mean, one of the things that he did, I mean, and I still urge people to read that speech. And it's the less beautiful part. By the way, the beautiful part where he is said nostalgia is not a strategy.
Yeah. Hey,
Uh,
let me take a quick moment to sort of give a couple of the lines from the speech because I
yes,
think
good.
it's worth it. He called what's happening a rupture, not a transition, and he said, "This old order is not coming back. We should not mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy. The powerful have their power, but we have something too: the capacity to stop pretending, to name reality, to build our strength at home, and to act together."
Yes. And to that end, you know what he also did, and he mentioned at the end, he said, "We just Canada, that is, signed a bilateral trade agreement with China to bring in electric vehicles to Canada without tariffs." You think Elon Musk like that? You
Mm,
think anybody in the Trump administration like that? Is that
mm.
good for the American people? I mean, this is the result of this Trumpism and tariffs and the bullying is that Europe, Canada will draw closer to China. They'll create their own trade agreements. They'll bypass the United States. I mean,
Yeah,
that's just not good for America. That's not good for the heartland. That's not good for. It's the opposite of America first. So I do think from now on, Europe and America are not, going to be best buddies anymore. And the Europeans have realized that we just can't count on America. And for him to say that the NATO let the United States down,
yeah,
first of all, it makes no sense because we are NATO. Second of all, the only
right.
time
Other countries have sacrificed lives for America's, interests.
and Denmark lost more soldiers in Afghanistan per capita than the United States did.
Yeah.
They were part of NATO invoking Article 5 after 9/11. So again, I try not to get upset about the lies and the ridiculousness,
The
and I try to
ignorance,
look
honestly, about
and the
history.
ignorance. But I try to like what's the outcome here, and that's what we're grappling with. The outcome here is this long time Atlantic alliance, which preserved the peace for 80 years, which was a great alliance. It's not that it's no more, but it's not ever going to be the same again.
Right, right, and do you look at the, is it about, broadly speaking, the kind of the demolition of the international order and the reliance on international rules, or do you think, and do you think this was really an economic rupture, or do you think it really is kind of, Trump or no Trump, that the coming years are going to be hard to put the pieces back together?
100% on that last, but I think everything is economic, but it's not economic in the sense that what we've seen in this last 10, 15 years, and not just the last, you know, 10 months, is, I mean, the violation of the most basic principle of the global world order, that you don't violate the boundaries of another country, that countries have
Yeah,
a territorial integrity. You don't invade them. I mean, there's nothing simpler than that.
yeah,
And Putin violated that in the greatest, most profound, most awful way since World War II. And then what you had with Trump in Greenland is a NATO member, in the face of what's happening in Ukraine, threatening to invade the territory of a fellow NATO member. Of all the ways that Vladimir Putin has tried to break up NATO
yeah.
in 30 years, he never thought of, hey, maybe America will invade another NATO country and that'll break up NATO. So, I mean, Vladimir Putin is ecstatically happy. I mean, I
Yeah,
try to read as much of the Russian press as I can. They're all like cackling about this, and so I think it's just this is the red line of red lines, where
yeah,
you don't invade another country, and you don't threaten to invade another country. You don't threaten to invade an ally, which almost nobody's ever thought of as a possibility. So I think the rupture, as Mark Carney put it, comes particularly from Trump and
yeah,
his extreme version of it, but that it's been happening for a long time, and these erosions of the rule of law have been going on for a long time too.
yeah. I mean, how much do you look at this as being, the kind of the derangement of Trump and his, narcissistic need to be at the center of things, and this kind of pattern of his to, to sort of describe sort of how he's being victimized in some way, coming up with some sort of crazy idea which leads to a crisis, and then he comes up with, the concept of a deal so that he can then claim victory. I mean, we've seen that pattern play out where he's created crises that didn't exist. But how much do you look at this as being about, Trump and his, frankly, kind of mental collapse, mental decline, and how much of it do you think is really consciously serving the interests of Vladimir Putin?
Well, everything you've said, Stephen, is true. I mean, that pattern, we've seen it over and over and over and over again. I mean, his negotiating strategy of, saying something so exaggerated and so extreme and then settling for less. Um, so we've seen that pattern over and over, and I just have always thought, and it saddens me to say it, that Trump is a symptom as much as a cause.
Mm,
And so when he comes to these meetings without preparation, without historical knowledge, without knowing what happened to Greenland during World War II, or thinking he knows it, I mean, all, all of that just accentuates those sort of base characteristics of racism, anti-immigration, feeling of aggrievement that somehow we've been taken advantage of, even though we are by far the greatest beneficiary of the globalized
right.
rules-based world order. Um, is that even if he had a fancy speech and used the teleprompter, those things would still come out, because
Yeah.
that's who he is, and that represents the feelings, the ideas of lots of people. Unfortunately, lots of Americans, and we see the rise of authoritarianism, as we've talked about many times abroad. That's why he's a symptom. What's happened in France, what's happened in Italy, what's happened in Hungary. You
Yeah.
know, Trump is just the extreme outlier of that, because he is reflecting some of these non-progressive uh, 19th century values, strong men, authoritarian principles that have a lot of attraction for people who don't want to make decisions about their own lives or decisions on who their leaders are.
Yeah, so he came. I mean, he agreed to finally with Rutte the concept of a deal, right? Nothing that was articulated in any specific way, but it does. I mean, this may be his pattern, but it does raise the question about in this particular case, what changed his mind? And I sort of made a list in my mind. Is it the stock market drop right away? Is it the serious threats of retaliation? Was it business leaders explaining that there would be actually a serious impact if Europeans pull out their investments in U.S. treasuries? I mean, can you depict in any way what you think might be at work here?
I think, seeing Europe kind of aligned against him, European leaders being upset. Yes, the stock market is always a big tell for him. I think the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I think it's possible Marco Rubio understands what's going on. Um, he's whatever, like my dad used to say, I may be dumb, but I ain't stupid. I mean, there's sometimes things can get to him. I mean,
Yeah,
he understands that he doesn't actually want to commit suicide. So, but the thing about the deal, though, and you mentioned that, so he said, at heart, I'm a real estate guy. And of course, that's what this deal is, because
yeah,
the whole last part of his real estate empire and career was he didn't build any buildings. He licensed his name to go on other buildings. That's in effect what the Greenland deal is. They'll have
yeah,
a little flag of the United States and then a gold T for Trump at a few bases in
yeah,
Greenland. And he'll be able to say, yes, United States is now owns these parts of Greenland. The
yeah.
analogy is that
Bases that the United States already had access to defend itself.
and closed down after, we had dozens of bases there after World War II. But the analogy I've seen, and again, it's other people's reporting, not mine, that and it has this colonial ethos to it about British military bases in Cyprus.
Yeah,
So those British military bases in Cyprus, if you go on them, it's just like a little piece of, England, and that's what I think it sounds like what's going to happen. They're going to have bases in Greenland that have U.S. sovereignty.
yeah. So a few more McDonald's come to Greenland and everything will be fine all over again.
Exactly.
We live in a world, in a weird world, and I take the point that this didn't just start with the arrival of Trump, and that he is a symptom, not narrowly a cause. But I'm thinking about Carney's speech, a rupture, not a transition, and really asking the question, I mean, how much abuse and whiplash will Europeans take? And is this a moment where, we really can talk about a turning point in terms of America's relationship with Europe? And not just 3 years from now, but 10 years from now, we're going to still be paying the consequences.
Yes, and what I would say too is that these issues are going to be around for decades. And one of the things that Carney said, one of the unpleasant truths that he said, was that globalization wasn't always working for us,
Mm.
even though we were again a big beneficiary of it. But there were some negative effects, and I blame both parties for not having come up with, starting 15, 20 years ago, and this is a phrase that used to make people crazy, an industrial strategy for the United States.
Yeah.
What happens when workers in the Midwest lose their jobs, either through offshoring or through mechanization and automation, which was the main reason that people started losing jobs? China, by the way, even though it has the biggest workforce in the world, also is the leader in automation. They're going to
Mm.
have these same problems too. But we needed to figure out, well, what kind of retraining were you going to do? What can take the place of some of these factories? And I blame both parties for that.
And by
Um,
and by the way, that's a problem that's been going on for, over 40 years, right? I mean, essentially, there was a important book in the early '80s called The Deindustrialization of America, and I happened to be reporting from Western Pennsylvania around the time in the '80s. I'm that old, when the world was the economic world there, which was steel mills, and the steel industry was collapsing, and you had 150,000 people who lost their jobs, people who didn't know how to do anything else. And that's 40 years ago. And I mean, I take the point. We haven't worked that out 40 years later so that the transitions would happen, so that there wouldn't be, you know, in essence, many millions of Americans who continue to feel, ignored and disconnected from the society, from the economy, and are angry. They've been harboring those grievances for a very long time.
100%. Like, I remember that day, I remember covering Bill Clinton's campaign in '92 and in New Hampshire when he famously, got asked a question about, are the clothing mills gonna be coming back?
Mm,
And he said, "Man, they're never coming back." Well, okay, that's a great and candid answer, but then what do we do about that? And
yeah,
I bring it to the present day because we're facing this with artificial intelligence, that there are so many jobs, this time
yeah.
white collar jobs, that are not gonna be necessary. What are we doing to prepare for that? So, I mean, we need a post AI industrial strategy too.
Yeah, and look, I mean, to me, what it underscores is that we are wasting an enormous amount of time, energy, brain power in dealing with the manufactured crises of Trump at a time when what we really need is to address the real challenges that the country are facing. By the way, including something called the climate crisis, the climate change, which isn't disappearing just because Donald Trump says it's a hoax, and his sycophants are busy, trying to convince the world that we don't need wind and solar and all these other things. Um, you know,
S So, yes, 100%, and by the way, just to, pin the tail on the donkey a little bit here, part of the reason that we have never talked about an industrial strategy in
mm,
America the way the Europeans do is because the Republican Party was always against centralized planning or planning by the federal government. No, laissez-faire economics, let the states figure it out. By the way, all good things, let the states work on it, but
right.
let's have some central government planning around things that affect all Americans. And of course, the irony of the Trump administration is that there's no administration that has centralized power the
Yeah.
way the Trump administration has, in violation of every kind of historic norm and philosophy of the Republican Party. And yet all the Republicans are going
So
along
in
with it.
the effort to centralize power, not just in the United States, but globally, you have Trump coming up with his board of peace. And I want to just, I think it's where I want to end with us for the minutes we have, which is we've seen today, it includes Saudi Arabia and Kazakhstan and Turkey and Viktor Orban from Hungary and Qatar. And well, you get the picture, the people who are going to pay money to Donald Trump, in some cases, sort of third world countries that are very grateful to get access to Trump and the power of the United States. Who's not included? Not Canada, not France, not UK, not Germany, not Italy, not other European nations. So what is this thing? Is it just self-serving for Trump? Is it a way to make money? Is it just a final nail on the historic sort of democratic alliance and America's commitment to the UN? What is it?
Well, the short answer is I don't know. The second answer is I'm going to be a little bit contrarian about it.
Yeah,
And in light of what we were talking about before with Mark Carney's observation, as
yeah,
comical as it looks, as ridiculous as that logo is, as as mob boss as it is, of like you have to ante up $1 billion
yeah,
to get in. What we have seen is the failure of that old rules based global order to solve the Palestinian Israeli crisis, which has been a crisis for 50 years.
yeah,
So, I mean, and I've been involved in that in one way or another for a long time. The people who have worked to solve it are, historically are incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly decent people, but it hasn't worked.
yeah.
It's really been a failure. And some of that can be chalked up to, Netanyahu, but the idea that there would now be some non-normative, non-traditional way of trying to go about it, I welcome that.
Yeah.
I welcome that in the sense that's like, you you know,
If they're good
he,
faith actors.
yes, it's like here's where he could really say, "Hey guys, all of you Davos men, you've really failed in kind of having peace in the Middle East."
So so
I'm not.
so
I'm not.
let's take
Yeah,
it seriously for just a second.
yeah.
Look, you're somebody, you spent a lot of time in South Africa. You wrote a book about Nelson Mandela. You were, there in the sort of transition from apartheid. There were the Truth and Reconciliation efforts there to for the country to genuinely move on from that period. I mean, do you see in a legitimate board of peace that there's a role that can play, that what it could look like, that actually confronts, deals with Gaza, that confronts and deals with some of these other issues?
I think what's interesting about it, if you put the comical stuff
Yeah,
um, aside, what's interesting about it is that it's economic in its outlook and in its foundation. It's not trying to change people's ideologies or get people who don't necessarily accept each other, but it's like, you want to make a dollar, you want to live better, you want to have clean water, um, and so if the ideological negotiations that have happened for decades and decades haven't worked. Maybe there is some kind of economic way, um, you know, the invisible hand of people wanting to be prosperous that could help solve the crisis. I mean, I'm not saying it's, as Jared Kushner said, it's a real estate deal,
yeah,
but real estate is part of it. And so, the thing about, they used to joke about the Palestinians, they never missed a chance to miss it. They never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. I would say that about Bibi Netanyahu. He's
yeah,
had so many opportunities to have some kind of new dispensation with the Palestinians, and he's resisted it.
yeah,
I do think now is another opportunity, and I think one of the things, again, on the plus side that the Trump one did was, the Abraham Accords brought in some of those Gulf states, uh,
mm,
and that's like, and I would have said to Bibi, you got UAE now. You have Bahrain. You're gonna get Saudi Arabia if you make a deal with the Palestinians.
yeah. But the
Eh,
depth of destruction, I mean, the unwillingness to move to that phase is just, unconscionable.
But I do think there's an opportunity. I wish there were, more experts involved in it. Um, I think it won't really happen until there's a post Netanyahu Israel, but that could be around the corner. So, I mean, to say I'm optimistic would be an exaggeration, but I don't dismiss it out of hand.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, let's end on a happy note, shall
Okay.
we? That maybe, we can make a list of all the ways that our work and our world is being dismantled and destroyed by a regime that has abandoned the rule of law and has abandoned the Constitution, has abandoned the world order, has abandoned, democratic historic allies, all of that. But maybe the Board of Peace can be a positive step in the right direction of somehow shaping a positive way forward. So let's be hopeful. That's, I think, a good place to be. So thank you, Rick. As always, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks everyone who joined the conversation. Always looking forward to talking to you, Rick. And if you're not a subscriber to America, I hope you will be. If you don't know Rick's work, his books, the many ways in which you can find him on television and otherwise, you should make a point of doing so. Rick, thanks so much.
Stephen, thank you and bless you. Okay.
Bye.